Welcome to a deep dive into one of the most discussed and controversial diplomatic strategies of the decade. As Donald Trump returns to the political spotlight, his 24-hour claim to end the conflict in Ukraine has moved from campaign rhetoric to a structured, though highly debated, peace plan. Today, we're exposing the layers of this strategy, examining how it deviates from decades of American foreign policy. We will analyze the core pillars of the proposal, the specific territorial demands, and the global implications that have leaders from Kyiv to Brussels on edge. This isn't just about a deal, it's about a fundamental restructuring of the global order. We are looking at a plan that seeks to leverage American military aid as both a carrot and a stick, aiming for a swift resolution that many critics fear could come at a massive cost to Ukrainian sovereignty and Western unity.
The centerpiece of the Trump peace proposal involves an immediate freeze of the current front lines. This would effectively create an 800-mile demilitarized zone stretching across the current battlefields of eastern Ukraine. Unlike traditional peacekeeping missions, the proposal explicitly states that American troops will not be responsible for patrolling this zone. Instead, the plan suggests that European and British forces would shoulder the burden of enforcement. This freeze would leave Russia in control of approximately 20% of Ukrainian territory for the foreseeable future. For Ukraine, this means an agonizing choice: accept a cessation of hostilities at the cost of land, or continue a war of attrition without guaranteed long-term U.S. support. It is a tactical maneuver designed to stop the bleeding, but one that freezes a geopolitical wound in place.
Perhaps the most controversial element of the peace plan is the proposed 20-year moratorium on Ukraine joining NATO. For years, membership in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has been the ultimate security goal for Kyiv. Trump's advisors argue that Russian concerns over NATO expansion are a primary driver of the conflict. By taking membership off the table for 2 decades, the plan seeks to remove Putin's primary casus belli. In exchange, the United States would continue to provide massive amounts of weaponry and military training to Ukraine, essentially turning the country into a highly fortified porcupine that Russia would be afraid to touch again. However, this leaves Ukraine in a security gray zone, protected by American steel but denied the collective defense guarantees of Article 5.
One of the most distinct America First hallmarks of this plan is the delegation of enforcement. While the U.S. would provide the weaponry and intelligence, it refuses to provide the boots on the ground or the financial backing for the peacekeeping operation. The Trump team has been clear: the peacekeeping forces must come from Europe, specifically Polish, German, British, and French troops. This puts the European Union in a difficult position. They would be responsible for maintaining the 800-mile DMZ and ensuring that neither side violates the ceasefire. Critics argue this could fracture the alliance, as Western European nations may be hesitant to put their soldiers in the crosshairs without direct U.S. involvement. It shifts the risk and the cost of stability directly onto the shoulders of Brussels. We must address the elephant in the room: the 20% of Ukraine currently under Russian occupation. The Trump plan does not explicitly demand that Russia return this land through military force. Instead, it accepts the current reality as the starting point for a long-term diplomatic resolution. This includes Crimea, the Donbass, and parts of the southern land bridge. For President Zelensky, this is a non-starter, as the Ukrainian constitution and public sentiment demand the restoration of 1991 borders. However, the Trump strategy hinges on the idea that neither side can achieve a total military victory. By acknowledging the 20% territorial control, the plan seeks to move from a war of movement to a frozen conflict, hoping that over decades, diplomatic or economic shifts might change the status quo.
Vice President-elect J.D. Vance has been one of the most vocal proponents of this vision. He has described the plan as creating a strongly fortified border that prevents further Russian incursions, while explicitly denying Moscow's control over the rest of Ukraine. Vance's perspective is rooted in a desire to pivot American resources away from Europe and toward the Indo-Pacific. He argues that the U.S. cannot be the arsenal of democracy indefinitely if it means neglecting domestic issues or the threat from China. His vision of the DMZ isn't just a line on a map, it's a strategic retreat from the role of global policeman. This fortified border approach would rely on Ukrainian grit and European money, marking a historic end to the post-Cold War era of American security guarantees in Europe.
How do you get both sides to the table?
Trump intends to use economic leverage unlike anything seen before. For Ukraine, the threat is the total cessation of aid. For Russia, the threat is an even more massive surge in weaponry provided to Kyiv if Moscow refuses to negotiate. Furthermore, the plan discusses a lend-lease-style model for future support, meaning Ukraine would eventually have to pay for the defense it receives. Reconstruction is another major piece of the puzzle. The plan hints at using frozen Russian assets, roughly $300 billion, to fund the rebuilding of Ukraine, but only if a peace deal is reached. This creates a financial ticking clock for both nations. It's a high-stakes game where the dollar is used as a weapon as much as the HIMARS missile. The risks of this peace plan are significant. NATO allies, particularly those on the eastern flank, like Poland and the Baltic states, fear that such a deal would signal to Putin that territorial conquest is a viable strategy. If the US forces a deal that leaves 20% of Ukraine in Russian hands, what stops Russia from testing the borders of Estonia or Latvia in 5 years? There is also the risk of US credibility. For decades, the US has stood by the principle of territorial integrity. Abandoning that, even for a necessary peace, could embolden China regarding Taiwan or other regional powers with territorial ambitions. The plan risks creating a peace of the grave, a temporary silence that precedes an even larger, more globalized conflict.
At home, the plan is a cornerstone of the America First agenda. A significant portion of the American electorate has grown weary of what they perceive as forever wars and blank checks for foreign nations. Trump's plan appeals to this sentiment by promising to end the drain on the U.S. Treasury and focus on the southern border and the domestic economy. Recent polling suggests that while many Americans support Ukraine, there is a growing demand for a defined exit strategy. The peace plan is, in many ways, a domestic political document as much as a foreign policy one. It frames the resolution of the conflict as a win for the American taxpayer, regardless of the messy geopolitical realities on the ground in Eastern Europe.
As we conclude our look at the peace plan exposed, one thing is certain: the world is at a crossroads. Whether this plan leads to a lasting peace, a temporary freeze, or a catastrophic failure of the Western alliance remains to be seen. The strategy represents a massive gamble on the personality of a few leaders and the economic exhaustion of two nations. As we move into 2025, the implementation of these ideas will be the defining test of the new administration's foreign policy. Will it be the masterstroke that ends the largest land war in Europe since 1945, or the first step toward a more fractured and dangerous world? The answer will shape the lives of millions and the security of the globe for generations to come. Thank you for watching this objective analysis of the plan that could change everything.